you for that. I know we began the interview with you describing how paranormal phenomena affects individuals' lives. Can you tell us now how it affects us collectively?
Yes. Yeah, we sort of established that paranormal events and happenings to individuals are just like wake-up calls, just little nudges to help demonstrate to those individuals that reality is bigger than just the physical. And that's kind of the reason for it. And the system does that just to help those individuals on a path toward evolving themselves. And it does it because their evolution is the system's evolution. So we've kind of come back and tied all that together. Well, it doesn't just happen on an individual level. There's lots of collective, we can say collective level, but levels in which groups of people kind of get that nudge together. And I can think of, we can probably together come up with, half a dozen examples of that. Now, what happens most of the time is when we have a kind of a collective nudging, if you will, with a larger consciousness system. People who don't understand consciousness, don't understand the nature of reality, don't understand that this is a virtual informational reality, they have a tendency to want to explain those happenings with some kind of physical phenomena, even if the physical is kind of strange or some sort of physical-like structure. So what happens is that we have things, for instance, we'll take an example. Look at the crop circles. Okay, these crop circles are patterns within grain fields. Fields of grass or grain that are growing, and then we have some very intricate patterns. And these patterns sometimes show up overnight. And the patterns would be very difficult to make in a week with a lot of people making a lot of noise, but these will show up on a quiet night, where there were people around but nobody heard or saw anything, or sometimes they might see the little lights moving around, whatever, and the next, 4 hours later when the sun comes up, here's this, 25-acre, pattern that has very intricate designs in it. And they are mysterious enough that there are groups of scientists from various places that study them and try to determine what might have happened and who might have done it. And of course, you'll always find a couple of people who want to go out and prank and try to do something like that, but those are rather obvious. And the scientists there have concluded that there's something strange going on here. It's something that we really can't pinpoint. We really can't understand. All the grass, all the wheat or whatever it is has been bent over a certain way with little black substance here, which looks like there was heat. And they've done a lot of analysis of it. And it just doesn't lend itself to a good explanation. So what happens is that people look at it and say, well, obviously, something major and massive happened here. We're talking about 10 acres or 20 acres or some massive pattern. And if humans couldn't do it, that's one of the conclusions they come to, that with all our technology, and if we spent $20 million and tried to make a pattern in a few hours with no noise in the middle of the night and no lights, could we do this? And basically it's like it would be very, very difficult. And it would need so many people and so much equipment that it couldn't be done in a field that nobody heard, saw, anything. The circumstances under which it happens makes it virtually impossible that humans could have produced it. Well, if it wasn't humans producing it, somebody had to produce it. Oh, it must be extraterrestrials, it must be ETs are producing it. That's the explanation. Well, you get that explanation because people don't understand the reality they live in. They think they live in an objective physical reality. So some other physical kind of beings, not human, must have done it. Well, that's ETs, So then right away, crop circles are proof of extraterrestrials coming here and playing games with us, doing these things. Well, if they understood the nature of reality, they would see that we live in virtual reality to begin with. It's not physical. It's just data. The larger consciousness system basically has set up and created this virtual reality for consciousness to experience and to grow up in. And as you know, if you're familiar with simulations, you can have a simulation just do anything you want. You know, simulations are simulations. You know, even in the games people play, there's always these, what do they call it, cheat codes. You know, things that make unusual things happen. I remember my children playing Age of Empires. It was a game of really kind of cultural evolution. But if you knew the cheat code and people were kind of beating you up, you know, it's like warring different groups of people. If you knew the cheat codes, you could materialize a Mercedes-Benz with a nuclear warhead launcher on it, and you could drive around in your Mercedes-Benz and blow up all of your enemies, you see. And this was a cheat code. So in virtual realities, anything goes. Now, to have a good schoolhouse like ours, you can't have this sort of, you know, cheat code going on all the time, and letting the players do it isn't a good idea, you know. But the point is that in a virtual reality that's informational, the larger consciousness system, who is, you know, the creator of the game, if you will, and has all the information, can pretty well do whatever it likes as far as manifesting things that happen here. So it wants to nudge individuals, and sometimes, like we talked with Eliza Methouse, in that case, that individual then spread it to thousands of others. But often it's just for the individual's use. It doesn't spread much. It's that individual may talk to a few people, but mostly they don't talk to anybody. They're not going to tell anybody. The lady that told me about appearing behind and above herself, watching herself apply lipstick in front of a mirror, she says, I've never told anybody about that. You know, so most people don't share that, because if I told you that, you'd think I was, you know, you think less of me. Oh, they have a screw loose. They really don't have a firm grip on reality. You know, they're prone to hallucinations. So most people don't mention it. They keep it to themselves. Well, you could see that the larger conscious system might want to do a few things that were public, not just individual, but were public enough that get people's attention that there's something bigger than just this physical reality, because just this physical reality isn't going to produce those crop cycles. You know, scientists have pretty well said that it doesn't happen here because it's too hard to do. We can't do that without lots of people and lots of noise and you can't do that secretly in a few hours in the middle of the night, particularly when there's dozens of people scattered around in these fields with cameras and things just watching to see what might happen. You know, there's lots of observers out there, and it happens anyway, right in front of them. And sometimes they have, they'll look with their cameras and they'll see little spots of light running around in the fields. You know, they'll see this, but they hear nothing. And then the next day, of course, when the dawn comes, you know, here's this, 15-acre pattern laid out. Well, so the larger consciousness system, this is Tom Campbell's view, the larger consciousness system is producing these kind of effects in order to help wake up people. Reality is a lot stranger, a lot larger than you think, you know. And it does, even though people jump to the conclusion about, well, then it must be aliens, because in their mind it has to be if it's not this physical, race of people, then it must be something comes from somewhere else that does it, because obviously some sort of beings have to do it. Well, of course, that's not true. They're trapped in a belief that nothing can be done if beings don't do it. Well, at least physical beings don't do it. So anyway, the larger consciousness system can produce those kinds of things. Now, we have lots of other things that happen kind of on a grander scale. We have energy points that are various places. And they have a lot of history about, how they got there and what they do. And these are just things that have been created by the larger consciousness system to help people see that there's a larger reality. And it's not that these things don't exist or whatever, but they are there for a reason. And the reason is the same as why somebody suddenly gets a message from their Uncle Fred on their answering machine. You know, that happens. Uncle Fred's been dead for 10 years, and suddenly, the phone rings, maybe, and the person picks up and he says, "Hi, I'm your Uncle Fred," and they have a conversation with him, and then it ends, and the people think, "Did I just imagine that? Was that just my imagination or what?" Because you can't explain it. Well, these things happen. Sometimes it comes in over a fax, or a picture will appear on a fax machine. So we've got lots of those sorts of individual things.
Now, these things that you're describing, that would also include aliens, alien abductions, UFO sightings, those kinds of things.
Many of those kinds of things, yes. UFO sightings, other things that they open people's minds. If you open your mind to something greater than just what is normally in our culture, right? Which is, we have this universe. As far as we know, we're the only people. We're the only people in it. Although the probability is there are other places. There's a much higher probability. But as far as we know, it's just us, and it's this physical, our solar system, our universe, and that's kind of where science leaves it. Science won't go past that point, and the culture kind of picks up on that, and that's their attitude. This is it. This little physical reality we know is it. That's all there is to reality, period. And these things kind of jar people into saying, no, it's bigger than that. It's, there's other dimensions, there's other things, it's larger. And if people then jump to the conclusions that it's aliens, as opposed to it's working, in consciousness, now people will wake up and there's an alien standing at their bed, right? Well, that tends, in my mind, is probably they're doing that in a altered state, if you will, although it doesn't seem that way. Altered states can seem just as real as the awake state. You don't know that. Also, the larger consciousness system can just have that happen, just like the Mercedes-Benz with the nuclear launcher. It can just create that image for you to give you something else. It's bigger than what you think.
I think we should clarify. I know this is your philosophy. You say from your viewpoint,
Mm-hmm.
From Tom's viewpoint. Your My Big Toe books are science, metaphysics, physics, philosophy. This is your philosophy of your model of how things work. But I think we should clarify something, and we've touched on this before, but for this particular interview, that you are not just coming from a philosophical viewpoint on these things. This is not just your opinion. You have researched every aspect of what you have put into your books yourself, because not only are you the scientist, which is what you are here first and foremost, but you are also the consciousness explorer, and you have verified your own work from the outside in. Can you
that's
comment
that's
on
true.
that?
I could never have arrived at the My Big Toe theory had I not been able to do experiments and had kind of unfettered access to the larger consciousness system, because I wouldn't have been able to make the leap. I wouldn't have been able to have to have gone beyond kind of the belief system here, unless you have that entree into the larger consciousness system. It'd be very difficult to take that step. Particularly as a scientist, it would be very hard to do that. So yes, that's true, and I have done that, and this is science. But on the other hand, I also have to say I don't have all the answers necessarily, and I don't have all the data, and I haven't had all the experiences. And I don't mean to imply that people who have had experiences with alien encounters or whatever, that their experiences, aren't just as they feel they are. Okay, that's not my point. I'm not denying that any of that exists. I'm just saying that some of it, at least, is probably due to the consciousness system. The consciousness system can play alien if it wants to. You see, the consciousness system can be, a little green man with pointy ears, or, whatever the other images we have, right? That's, I guess, an old image. Now we have grays and reptilians and other kinds of things. But the larger consciousness system can play all those parts very easily. We live in a virtual reality. We get a data stream, and anything can be inserted in your data stream, and that's the reality that you have when you get things inserted in your data stream. So, and it's just as real as this reality, because this physical reality is just data inserted in your data stream. So there's really no different. And the consciousness system can play all those parts. And the reason to play those parts is just to wake people up to a larger thing, so to open their mind, expand the possibilities in their mind. Because if you have your mind expanded in one area, even if that's a UFO area, it's easier to have it expanded in other areas. So it's part of the process of nudging people to think in terms of bigger pictures. So it's not that these people are having experiences and it's not really what they think and they don't know, whatever. They have their experiences. Their experience is their experience. And it's as real and as viable as the experience of walking around in this physical reality is real and viable. But it's all just data. And they don't, once we get data, we interpret it. So we interpret the data in terms of our knowledge, in terms of our fear, in terms of our beliefs, in terms of our experience, in terms of our culture. That's how we interpret the data. And if we interpret the data as aliens, well, that's our interpretation. If we interpret it, as who knows what, something else, then that's our interpretation. So it's everything we get is just an interpretation of data. There is nothing that we perceive that isn't an interpretation of data. And our interpretations are all personal. So that's kind of the bottom line. Now, I'm always espousing open-minded skepticism. And I'm entirely open-minded that some things may be, may not be the way that I'm saying them. Because this is my interpretation, you see. This is how I interpret the data.
I think it's important to state that your interpretation is coming from a much bigger, because of your experience, your extensive experience with the larger consciousness system and science, your interpretation is coming from a much bigger viewpoint than most people's. And that you, I don't think, would propose an idea or a concept without having tested it out yourself.
Well, and if it weren't viable and if it didn't fit well within this scientific model, yes, these are things that fit in the scientific model. That doesn't necessarily make them, the way I present them, but they do fit within the scientific model. And all of that My Big Toe is a model. It's a way of looking at reality. And if the value in it is that it ties things together, so that one understanding explains many, many things. It may just be an individual. One individual may be given skills, let's say to heal. And that individual then may go around and heal thousands of people and get tens of thousands of people watching the videos and finding out about it and whatever. And that individual is responsible for nudging awake tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. And how is it that he just ended up with those skills? Well, maybe another part of the larger consciousness system's demonstration, if you will, that reality is more than what you think it is. You see, there's lots of things like that. So it's not just necessarily crop circles, but there was a video on YouTube. There was a fellow who was kind of out of the jungles or out of the rural area of Indonesia, maybe, someplace in the east. A German camera crew came and talked to him, and he could take his hands and start a fire. And he took a straw, pushed it through a wooden table. And he did a few other things like that he demonstrated for the cameras. And as best that anybody could tell, it was all very legitimate. But he said that his master, who was not, I think, a physical being, but a non-physical being, told him that he should go share these things, you see. So he then calls the camera crew up and says, here, let me show you some things. They make the camera crew, and then the guy disappears back into back into wherever he came from, and it's gone. Well, why did that happen? And this guy used the energy ki, right? It's energy, chi. And he did it through meditation and concentration, and he'd spend his lifetime, meditating and doing these kinds of things. But he does these demonstrations because he's got the message that it would be a good thing to do. And in any case, that's, the larger consciousness system creating a situation that spreads the nudges, if you will, to lots and lots of people. So we tend to think of these things as just isolated little happenings. It's just an isolated event. Here's some guy walks out of a jungle in Indonesia and very casually does all these things that nobody else can do, and thousands of people go, wow, look at that. There was a movie that Matrix that he showed, and it was back in the, late 1800s, early 1900s. There was a guy who stuck swords through himself. Really a gruesome thing that should have been fatal. And he did this with demonstrations. He was a guy, perfectly unremarkable clerk or, attorney or something someplace, and then kind of out of nowhere, normal kind of childhood, and then out of nowhere he has it wasn't like a near-death experience, but he had some kind of major sort of experience, and after that, he's changed. And he goes around in front of crowds, running himself through with swords that go in and come out the other side, And all of those things should have been fatal, but he gets over them.
That's something like the martial arts masters who can, like Dennis Nenerick does, chop through a concrete block, almost like that physical object isn't there, I think, is the mental concept of that. So, and that must be the same with the sword.
Yeah, so these things are dramatic things that kind of demonstrate the power of mind, if you will. They demonstrate the power of consciousness, and that this reality isn't just the physical reality that the scientists would have you believe, because otherwise things can't happen that way.
There's a wonderful young man in Toronto, Adam, called Dream Healer, and he brings in huge audiences to demonstrate his healing abilities. He had as a child, very early as a child, it started with him healing his mother's muscular dystrophy, and he simply had these talents, and now he's a young medical student in medical school trying to integrate his healing ability with traditional medicine. And I think he's an example of one of those people who is showing the masses that this kind of thing is, we are more than what we appear to be, and that you can do these things. He does also empower other people by showing them, look, and he gives them scientific ways of doing things. He has things called a SMART packet of healing exercise, and it's very scientifically done and well done. But this has impacted a lot of people into the larger reality.
I guess the point we were making with all of this is that we have these phenomena, these kind of unexplainable phenomena. Sometimes they're personal, like a precognitive dream. Sometimes they're like an individual, like Adam. Sometimes they're things like the crop circles. There's things, and our tendency is to say there's some what's the physical cause for that? There must be a physical cause. Well, if it isn't human or the earthly physical cause, then it must be aliens are physically doing it. Some invisible ship that comes over and stamps out crop circles, you see, and things like that. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but look, something physical had to do it, right? So it's either these aliens, or it's us, or it's it's farmers from the area playing jokes on the rest of us. You have to make some kind of physical explanation. And I guess the whole point of our discussion is that's not necessarily the way it works. You live in a virtual reality. There is not necessarily going to be a physical explanation for these unexplainable things. It may just be the larger consciousness system giving us a nudge to show us that reality is bigger. We take people like Adam and we say, well, they're just, some kind of unusual, some kind, it's a mystical, it's kind of a magical event that somebody just was kind of born with those kinds of things, those kinds of abilities and whatever. And the guy who ran himself through swords, these strange people pop up. And see, they pop up through all the time. You go back 100 years and there were people doing things like that. People levitating other people, and it wasn't magic tricks, there were lots of people that, I don't know, the science of the time, looked at it and couldn't understand it. We've had these I couldn't understand it things going on forever. It's not just now, and that seems like it's a natural extension of what we see with individuals and what we see all over. It's part of living in a virtual reality as a part of a larger consciousness system that interacts with us to help us evolve, which is helping itself evolve.
Yes, and I think that all of the enlightened beings who were sent here to help us go back to Scripture again, which is not my forte and not where I come from, but I think it's interesting to note all these things I do, you can do also. That is a quote out of Scripture that needs to be taken. That's a universal message. It needs to be taken at a universal level. This is what these beings, even though this was ancient times, this was said to help people try to understand that who they were.
What they were. They were consciousness.
I'm not special. Yeah. All these things I do, you can do also. That was out of Scripture, and I think that is kind of what you are hinting at with these paranormal experiences. So I think that an interesting note to make also as a conclusion is that your my big toe theory ties all of this together. These are not isolated specialties, healing, psychics, different things like that. All of this phenomena fits into what you've presented in your model of reality.
Yeah, it's all part of one picture. I would kind of guess or project that somebody might say, well, why crop circles? That sort of thing. And well, those kinds of demonstrations are like we started saying in the beginning of this. Those kinds of demonstrations are for the people who can use it, for the people who can do something with it as far as their own personal growth. The majority of people can't use it, particularly in Western culture. They reject it. So these crop circles have been around for how many decades? Right? And it's still a fringe item, even though science says this is impossible. The belief is, some farmers with rakes and shovels go out and knock that stuff down and what well, that doesn't fly, of course. That's a ridiculous suggestion, but that's enough to help most people keep their fears and their beliefs together. It's kind of a, let's not go there. We know that's crazy and we know that's hokey because it has to be, because it's outside of my belief system, so I won't deal with it. So most of the people don't accept that. And that's one of the reasons why it can exist. You see, it's there just for the people who can use it. And over the number of decades that's been going on, there's been no doubt tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who know about it and have used it to open their minds to something larger. But let's say that the dominant culture press, dominant culture talking heads, let's say that they all got on board. They all said, oh yeah, look, crop circles, impossible, but here they are, and whatever. They'd probably stop happening. You see, their purpose wouldn't be there anymore. Their purpose is a wake-up nudge to those who are ready for it. If it suddenly became mainstream, it'd probably disappear. You probably wouldn't see any of it anymore. The purpose would be gone. So it's only there because it serves a purpose. And the purpose can only be served in the margins. You see, it's not, you don't want to convince a lot of people who aren't ready at an intellectual level. That's just going to create more trouble. We'll end up then learning the science of how mind controls things, and pretty soon we'll be in a very nasty society where everybody's trying to control everybody else with their mind. We don't need this as a widespread understanding. We need it just among those who can grow from it, you see? So it's there, and it's nudging people who are making some use of it, but it's not being accepted in the larger society where then it could be abused. You know, the knowledge of mind, and that intent modifies probable future, you know, those kinds of things. You don't want that as an accepted idea, or you'll end up like the societies that are along, say, the east and west coast of Africa, where individuals will threaten each other with what they can do to harm them with their minds. You know, it's sort of the voodoo mentality, if you will. They call it different things. Voodoo, I think, is something that comes out of Haiti or some of those places, but there's similar kinds of things where mental structure, where mind affects matter, is used very negatively by people who have not grown, and that can be done. But you don't want that to take hold in a larger society. So you don't want the larger society who's not ready to grow, who's still full of fear and ego, to really accept these ideas. So they happen in the margins to wake up the people who are ready to wake up. The rest of the society who says, oh, that's ridiculous, they kind of need to have that attitude, if you will. We need them to have that attitude because they're not ready yet. If they had the tool, they're likely to misuse it.
Perhaps there was a civilization, we don't know whether Atlantis existed or not, but there are hints of an advanced civilization such as Atlantis where we were more in touch with the larger reality, and things like that did happen, and that
self-destruction.
Self-destruction.
Yeah, you don't want the tools that a person has to get out in front, to be bigger and stronger than the quality of the consciousness that's controlling those tools, you see. So it's better to have these things kind of bubbling up in the margins, nudging people on to bigger ideas, but kind of staying there in the margins. As long as they do, then they're useful. And for some reason, for some unusual magic reason, the press, say, doesn't do anything at all with crop circles. When's the last time you've heard, a new crop circle reported in, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or, the London Times or something like that? Never. See, the press ignores it entirely. Why do they ignore it entirely? There's scientists out there by the dozens studying it and doing things. All their reports, ignored entirely. It's ignored entirely. I think they have the idea that they need to ignore it. That's part of the sense that they get, that it's not something that can be told to the public. Not that they're keeping it from the public, but they themselves just kind of have the sense of, you don't say that in public. People would think you were nuts if you thought that was, there was something real going on there. So there's kind of a built-in reluctance to create that problem. It's kind of an intuition, if you will. So the larger society ignores these things. That's what allows them to stay and to be there and to be effective for those of us who can get something out of them. And basically it's just a demonstration of saying reality is bigger than you think. The physical thing is not the only thing going on here. Open your mind. Put your mind in a bigger box. You're in a little box. Let's expand your box a bit, because the bigger that box is expanded, even if it's expanded toward a UFO explanation, it's still expanded. And it's easier then to accept other things that are larger. So it's all part of the way things are done in this digital information system, this virtual reality, that we live in. So that kind of all ties a lot of things together, from magic places on the ground, what vortexes here and there, and why they're there, and so on. And have all this theory for people like Adam and people like, some some guy in Peru will walk out of the jungle and he heals and he does surgery and he does all these kinds of things. And what's all this weird stuff? Why is it going on? Well, weird stuff like that's always going on. And why? Why does it happen? Why did I have that precognitive dream? Why did I suddenly see myself putting on my lipstick in the mirror? Why did these things happen? Why did that ghostly kind of thing come through my house and do what it did, which was impossible? Why, all these things that happened. How is it that I knew that my child was hurt? And I immediately jumped in the car and went to school to see, and sure enough, they were hurt. How do those things happen? Why do they happen? Lowell, an engineer friend of mine, saw a bunch of people in an airplane before it crashed. And one little girl, out of all the passengers, was in color. There was one survivor, and it was a little girl. You see, and he knew that. He saw the whole situation a day or two before the crash happened. And it completely rearranged his life, completely changed his worldview in the sense that now he couldn't deny it. He's an engineer that, was just located in a physical reality, and suddenly he knew that reality was stranger. And that put him on a path to find out. So that's why these things happen. That's why somebody gets a fax on their machine from somebody that's been dead for a couple of years. And somebody will hear voices in a radio that's tuned between stations, or there's nothing station, and suddenly some sort of voice comes out. There's all sorts of mechanisms like that. And of course we blow it all off as somebody's imagination, but that's not the case. It's not that all these people are crazy and they're all making it up and they're all having hallucinations. These things happen. And they're just nudges and wake-ups, and they'll share it to a few friends, or maybe they'll keep it to themselves, or whatever. It all happens in the margins. As long as it happens in the margins, it doesn't really cause us any great difficulty. So that's kind of a tie all that. And I wish we could list a couple of other things. I don't know what they are, but there's probably dozens and dozens of these. Wow, isn't that strange? How could that possibly have happened? Isn't that weird? And
well, look at the apparitions in Lourdes and Fatima, things
yes.
like that. Those are from back 100 years.
Right, and those are in a religious context,
because
the religious people, they need to be nudged too.
Exactly.
It's that sort of stuff. And you have the, who was it, Daniken, who did looked at various things on the earth that obviously were made from a big picture perspective, like big runways, running across, miles and miles of things, that it's like, well, did people do that? It doesn't look like it. Must have been aliens. See, that was part of the must have been aliens picture again. Some picture of scraped on a wall, 900 years ago or 2,000 years ago, of a man with a round bubble over his head, like a space helmet and things like that. Well, the larger consciousness system can create anything, any physical construction that it wants to. And that construction helps us see bigger pictures.
I think people tend to think about things in the future. Oh, there were miracles then and there were things then, but there are miracles here every day. You just have to pay attention.
Oh yes, there are things that defy our sense of what's normal all the time. It's just that we tend to ignore them. We don't report them. It doesn't get passed around. Outside of the few people who personally witnessed it, it's regarded as foolishness and just kind of passed off because it conflicts with the belief. Any what do we call them, true believer, anybody who's really committed to a belief will dismiss anything that conflicts with that belief. And that's the way our science is, but that's also the way our culture is.
I think that's probably good, because it reinforces that your individual experience is the thing that is important. It doesn't have to be believed by anyone or accepted by anybody. Exactly. I think where you come from is very much that. Mm-hmm. Individual responsibility, individual experience, the only thing that's valuable to you is your own experience. And
That's
I
correct.
do like that about.
Yeah, consciousness is an individual thing.
Mm.
You know, consciousness is personal. So the only experience that's important experience to you is your personal experience. The only truth that can be your personal truth comes out of your personal experience. So that's really where it is. That's the thing. And some of us are more ready than others to grow and move along that path.
And as you've pointed out in our recent, and several recent talks, that doesn't mean someone is better than someone else.
No.
It's simply that we are so very much individual that we are all on a certain path at a certain level. We are who we are, and you need to respect everyone for where they are. I think it's very important not to make any "I'm better" or any judgments about that. I think that is what would bring about a true shift in peace.
Yeah, and if you think about it, having a demonstration of something that was paranormal, and paranormal just means beyond what can be explained by normal explanations. Normal being, the science view of the world, not the bigger science that I introduced, but the little science viewpoint of the world. If you thought about it, if there was some major demonstration that demonstrated to nations of people or millions of people at one time, what would be the effect of that? It would cause fear. It would cause confusion. It would cause turmoil. It would not be a positive thing. Fear, confusion, and turmoil are all high entropy things, you know. It would not be a good thing. So, and if it say, well, if it wants to do a demonstration, why not just, have it rain dimes or pink flowers one day over the whole world, and then the whole world would know? Well, that would not be a good idea. That would create just the opposite effect. That would create fear and confusion and all sorts of unpleasant things in the minds of people, and it would not be of any value. It has to be worked, as you say, just a few people at a time. It has to be worked in the margins with individuals, because that's where all the growth has to be individual. You can't, it's not a mass phenomena that can be done. So it has to be you have to kind of creep up on this from the margins, and otherwise it would be counterproductive. The mass of 100 million people aren't ready for that yet. They're not going to say, oh, look, reality's bigger than we thought. They can't do that, because now it's this mass thing. You're going to have mass hysteria, going with it.
I think there are some good people out there doing experiments collectively, but on a small level.
Mm-hmm.
John Hagelin with his experiments in reducing the crime rates in a certain area of the country.
Yeah, Dean Radin has some good experiments ongoing. Those experiments will lots of people. I mean, Dean Radin is doing good science. He's careful with what he does and the way he approaches his science. And those will help open minds. It'll help people step into a bigger box as far as their reality goes, and it's all very good. But you'll notice that it all stays in the margins. I mean, there are people who've been studying remote viewing now for the last 30 years, and studying it exhaustively. And the protocols are immaculate. They're double blind, triple blind, and people are still having great success at viewing the targets. Well, it only has to happen one time to break the rule of objective causality. But it happens hundreds and hundreds of times with many different people who are trained to do it. But yet, though this has been going on for 30 years and is very scientifically credible, you see, it's not credible at all in the larger society. It's still in the fringe. And they can publish papers and documents, so can Dean Radin, so can other people, but all the proof in the world is not sufficient, you see, because you're not going to convince anybody of its reality if it's not a personal experience to that individual. An individual that believes it's impossible will continue to believe it's impossible no matter how much other people say they have evidence to the contrary. So that's just the way it is. You know, sometimes people write to me and says, well, it would be great. Why don't you just do some kind of demonstration and then everybody would have to believe it? No, it doesn't work like that. Everybody wouldn't have to believe it. Nobody has to believe anything. The people who were right there would maybe consider it, but even people who see it in front of their eyes often walk away and still don't believe it. They'll say, well, I don't know what kind of trick it was. I couldn't figure it out, but it must have been some sort of trick, you know, and they'll just leave it at that. It's something that has to be crept up on, individual at a time. Things like crop circles will maybe do hundreds or thousands of individuals at a time, but only people that are kind of drawn to it. Only people open enough to go click on that site and go explore what kind of science has been done there, you see. Those will be the people who will kind of then open their mind. The people who are, oh, that's a bunch of crap. They'll never go, they'll never look, they'll never read anything, they'll never, you know, they'll never go there.
Here's another quote. Winston Churchill. People will sometimes stumble upon the truth, but they'll get up and walk away as if nothing happened.
Yeah.
Is that some sort of insight into the nature of the collective humanity?
Nature of belief.
The nature
Sure.
of belief. But
That's absolutely true. So maybe this will put a little perspective on the, quote, weird, unquote, things that seem to go on, and the weird and outlandish claims that seem to be made, you know, happening all over the planet, from UFOs to, you know, miraculous healings to other sorts of things, is that much of that is orchestrated, you know, what is it, you know, designed, you know, produced and implemented by the larger consciousness system just to stretch the minds of those who are ready for their minds to be stretched. Not to create panic in the streets, you know, not to slap people in the face with information they're not ready to deal with. That's counterproductive. You don't want to shove facts down somebody's throat who isn't ready to swallow. You do them more harm than good that way. I mean, some people have that idea that, oh, okay, we have these facts, we'll make everybody see it, but making everybody see it is not a good thing. You can't make somebody grow up. People have to come to it as they're ready. So that's the idea. Things are the way they're supposed to be. It's not that those stupid people out there just don't get it. They're not ready to get it yet. And you can't force feed them. But you can, like Dean Radin does, you can, you know, go do experiments, show it, keep stirring the pot, keep raising up, you know, like they do in Pear Labs. You know, Pear Labs have been going on for 20 years, maybe longer. And they do these wonderful experiments that show that mind affects matter. And they have any number of people who will affect the outcome of physical things with their mind, the way random events get affected by mental intent. They've done it over and over and over again. On their website they say you take them all together, and the probability that it's just happened that way kind of by accident, that it was it was just a kind of a random thing, is less than 1 in a billion. So science almost never gets values of it's 1 in a billion that this is a mistake, you know, that this is an error, that this is just random. It never does science that well. You know, 1 in 100 is often really good, and 1 in 1,000 is generally very good. 1 in 10,000, well, that's fact. Well, now they're talking about 1 in a billion. You see, they've done really good research, very careful research.
There's much admiration for those people.
So there are people out there doing it.
Yes.
But now, if you're in the Pear Labs, and that's Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research, this is Princeton. This is a top, you know, Ivy League science engineering house. This is not some ragtag bunch, you know, working in their basement. This is the creme de la creme of the, you know, science and engineering hierarchy, and they can't get things published. They take their work and try to get it published in mainstream journals. They won't be accepted, you see. So just because you can demonstrate scientifically with name brand scientists with lots of degrees after their name from a name brand institution, as far as the larger culture goes, means nothing. Unacceptable.
I think there's a book out there now that Pear Labs, the directors of the Pear Labs have finally published, that tell about their work over a 30-year span.
There's a website, and you can go look at their website. You can look at their research. They tell you all their protocols. They tell you what they did and how they built it and how they studied it, and every detail's there. It's open. It's not like, well, that probably was bad science. It's all there. It's good science. It's just that those who have a problem with belief, those that are trapped by their belief, have to say things like, oh, it's probably bad science, without ever really, and they'll never go look to see that, because they'd be frightened that it might turn out that it wasn't bad science. So they just say that and blow it off. But again, that's the same. They blow off the crop circles. You see, they blow off the healers. They blow off these things because they can't deal with that information. And to force feed it, to force them to deal with it, is the wrong approach. That won't help. That'll increase entropy. You'll create fear. You'll create all the things that you're trying to get rid of by doing that. So that's kind of the way the world is as it is. That's why it has all of these strange things. That's why the majority don't. Why can't they see that there's these good experiments? There's these physicists and engineers and highly trained people at Pear Labs doing these things for 30 years, 20 years. And why doesn't that convince everyone? Why doesn't science look at that and say, well, gee, I don't understand it, but it's a fact? It doesn't happen that way. The larger society is not ready to take that step. You can't force people to grow up. You have to let them get to the point where they're ready to grow up. But how do you help them? Oh, you have all these little things going on where you nudge them. You have all these little experiences that individuals have that kind of nudge them in that direction. So working at the individual level or at small groups, like the crop circle thing, the people that really pay attention to that are really a small group compared to the larger society. And you have these things going on, and that's kind of the bubbling of bigger picture in the margins to help grow the whole thing. So that's kind of why it works the way it is. So don't feel like, the people who aren't getting it, it's not that they're, something's wrong with them and we should force feed it to them. That's not good. They'll come around one day. One day when you have a large enough number of people who do get it, when that majority grows to be 60 or 70% of the population, the rest will fall in. But we're just, it's just bubbling along for now.
Well, thank you very much for this very informative and valuable interview. I know your readers will appreciate it. I do. And I hope that we will open some new people up, open some minds up to some of the concepts you have in your My Big Toe books. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Donna.